Welcome everyone to the game between Magnus Carlsen and Eduardo Iturrizaga at the World Rapid Championships. Right now we've reached the move number 7 here, and it's Iturizaga's move. And he plays his knight to d7. Let's see how we reach this position. The game started off with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight to f3. It was the Bogo-Indian. Magnus blocked with a knight, castles, a3, the bishop dropped back, and now Carlsen puts up a big center. The main move is d5 here, but d6 is also getting popular. Bishop e2, and now the knight jumps to d7, preparing the move e5 or c5. Magnus comes back to the board, and now one of the normal moves in this position is to castle. Can also go b4 here, but Magnus plays his knight to f1, so kind of a rare move has been played by Anish before. c5 played by Iturrizaga, and Magnus brings his knight to g3. So very interesting that the knight on b1 actually makes its way to g3, like the Ruy Lopez. Knight takes d4, and now we call this the Maróczy structure, where white has more space and is controlling these key squares. Carlsen castles here, and Iturrizaga must play this carefully, because when you are low on space, you have to be accurate. You're already strategically a bit worse. Bishop e3 by Magnus, bringing out his bishop, and now knight to f6 played, putting pressure on the e4 pawn. b4, gaining space in the position, and now Eduardo goes to the bishop d7. Will Magnus expand even further with f4? No, first he brings his rook. He takes control of the c-file, and rook c8 played, and now pawn to f4. An excellent move here, grabbing space in the center. Now Iturrizaga must be careful, he's already very passive. Rook e8, yes, it's like an hedgehog structure, but here he needs to come up with a plan. Magnus now even brings his knight back. He's like, I won't let you trade pieces because I have more space. Bishop f8, a typical move, bringing his bishop back. Maybe g6, bishop g7 next, and Magnus now plays pawn to c5. You must take. But he makes a mistake. He goes e5. Taking here was relatively better because after knight c5, bishop c5, white is better but black is fighting. e5, you take on d6, now you pawn up, but Eduardo is saying that the e4 pawn is hanging. Well, if you take rook takes f4, then after bishop e6, it's very difficult to defend the d6 pawn. So goes bishop f4, defending the d6 pawn, but he will lose the e4 pawn. Rook takes e4, and he jumps with the knight. Rook d4 played, attacking the queen, and queen b3, eyeing f7 points very quickly. Bishop e8 played, and now chops off the pawn on b7, Magnus already clearly better. Queen b6 played. You can see here that there can be a dangerous check on this diagonal, so the knight comes back and block it. Bishop takes d6, we have 4 pawns each, so right now materially black is doing fine. Also the f7 pawn is defended here, but white has this beautiful knight and he snatches a pawn, attacking the rook. And now white has 2 extra pawns on the queen side. This is a very tough position for it. Rook e1 is a nice move to attack the bishop, but he comes back bishop c4, putting pressure on f7. Although now you can go knight e5, defending the pawn and also attacking the bishop, and maybe Magnus's last move wasn't that accurate. If he had gone rook c e1, it could have been very nice to put pressure here. Anyway, bishop c4, knight jumps to e5, good move by Eduardo. He'll need to move the bishop now. He goes rook e1, and the point is of course you take, and if you take on a3, then e8 is hanging. So he takes the queen and takes the c4, and now also notice that bishop c4 is impossible because of the queen f7. So rook f6 played, Magnus takes, queen takes f6, and now everything's in control. Can we start already pushing? Yes, he does. All the back rank tactics, knight a4 and then rook e8 is a mate, so he goes h6, taking away the back rank issues, and Magnus goes b5. He's calmly pushing forward. Magnus has slightly low time on the clock, which is kind of unusual when he's winning, but this should be easily possible to, manage. Now, b6 cannot be played because the queen would take the pawn. a5 is a bit too rushed, so you have to be a little bit patient, and Magnus plays a very calm, cool, classy move, keeping an eye on the bishop on e8. Eduardo goes queen c3, he's attacking the knight on c5, and Magnus calmly brings his queen back to e3. Maybe there were other moves, knight b7 was stronger, but queen e3 makes sense. Queen to b4, keeping an eye on the rook and the knight, and h3, e8, and now the rook jumps in and defends the knight, so everything's protected here. The knight defends the pawn. Ooh, bishop b5. Eduardo says, I'm ready to sacrifice my bishop for 2 pawns. This endgame should be utterly lost, actually. King h2 by Magnus. This is not going to be easy to hold as black. Check, queen g3, and yes, if you take the queens, this endgame does require some effort, but should eventually be winning. He goes queen a8, he says, let's keep the queens on the board. And now defending this position against Magnus is just so difficult, because one of the things that Magnus does incredibly well is that he understands where each of the pieces belong. So rook to c3 played, and now Eduardo, he plays rook to c6, and now Magnus can calmly put his queen in the center. He can maybe then start pushing his h-pawn. He gets a bit impatient. He goes rook b3, and this allows Eduardo to sacrifice his queen with rook takes c5, because rook b8 check, he can give up the queen, and the question is, 3 versus 2, a fortress in that position. We'll first of all find this kind of fortress. It's actually not a fortress, to be honest. This is one of those guys who never really believes in fortresses. Takes. What an interesting endgame we are here. I think Magnus is winning this, but he has to play very carefully. Queen e3. Now, slowly, you want to start pushing your pawns, but more importantly, you want to get your king right into the heart of the position. That's not easy. Meanwhile, what Eduardo would want is some stable squares for his rook on the 3rd rank. That would be very important. So g4 played by Magnus, a good move. He understands these positions well. Okay, Iturrizaga needs to just keep moving his rook, so he plays rook a8, the king can start moving up.